Okay, today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about using a custom defined class, and a class is going to be a software package or a template that describes the characteristics of similar objects. And the characteristics fall into two really broad categories. First are going to be variables that hold the object's data, and then the second is going to be methods that define um, the object's responses to message, and usually what that's going to involve is a request to look at or to manipulate the data. If we look at the structure of a class template, it's going to have the class name, a description of the variables that are involved with that class, and then its methods. So that's the really rough outline of how you're going to work with a class. So we're going to open up JCreator, and we're going to use it to set up a basic template. You'll go to File, New, and File, and you'll select Java classes in the middle, and then Java class at the end. And then you will give the name of your class. And you want to make sure that you pay special attention to the name that you are assigning your class, because you'll be using that in interaction with later files. So let me change this location really quick so I can remember where I have this saved. And you'll hit finish. Okay, the name of the file is going to be right here. It's a student.java. The name of the class will correspond to the file name, and then you'll have one more method inside that. I'm going to adjust these curly braces so that they line up in the way that I like them to. Just like that. Okay, so if you remember from the really rough outline, a class is going to be comprised of two really broad categories. The first is variables which hold the class's data, and these variables are actually called instance variables because every instance of this class is going to have these variables. Instance variables are going to be private, which means that the variables can only be seen from within the class. This kind of makes it a little bit more resistant to tampering, which is a good thing. So the instance variables are going to be private, and then you just declare them like you would any other variable. This is a student class, so obviously we're going to need a string to hold the student's name, and we are also going to have three variables which hold test scores: test 1, test 2, and test 3, like so. As we start declaring these instance variables, you'll see in the class view over at the left, they pop up. You see name and test 1, test 2, and test 3. This is the name of the class right here. And then we also see our first method, which is right here, and it corresponds to this over here. And what this is a constructor method. So let me document that. And the method, or the job of any constructor method, is to initialize the instance variables. Whenever you instantiate an object using this class, this method is the first one called, and what it will do, it will set the initial values of the instance variables. So we're going to set name to be an empty string, test 1 to be 0, test 2 is also going to be set to 0, and test 3 will be set to 0, just like that. So right now we have our instance variables. We have 4 of them: name, which is a string, test 1, test 2, and test 3, which are integers. Remember, instance variables are going to have the visibility modifier of private as opposed to public, which is what all the methods that we'll have in today's example will have. Okay, so we're going to come down and we're going to work with our first mutator method. And what this mutator method is going to do, it's going to allow for a change in the name instance variable. Okay, like I said, all of the methods in this example are going to have a public visibility modifier, and in the method header what you're going to find is that the second word is going to tell you what type of data is going to be flowing out of this method. Now, if there isn't any method or any information flowing out of the method, the word that you're going to use is void. So we're going to call this public void set name, because we're setting the value of the name instance variable, and we have to have some information coming in, and what we will do is we will pass this in as a parameter. So the parameter list is going to immediately follow the method name, and each parameter that comes in, you're going to have to give their data type, or in this case the class, which is a string, and then you're going to give it a name that you'll use within this method. Do curly braces to set up the body of this method. And all that this method does is sets the value of the name instance variable, which is up here, to the information that's coming in, which we're calling nm. Okay, the only place that nm will exist is within this method. Okay, so we're taking this local variable and we're assigning its value to name, which is an instance variable which will exist anywhere in a class. Okay. As opposed to a mutator method, which changes the value of an instance variable, you also have accessor methods. And what accessor methods will do is they will look at the values that are contained within the instance variables, but they will not actually manipulate them. They just look at them, do calculations based on them, but they don't make any changes to that. Accessor methods, this accessor method is going to return the value of the name instance variable. Just like that. Okay. Methods in a class are to use the public visibility modifier, and this second word, remember up here, this is going to describe the type of information that flows out of this method. Okay, there was no information that was flowing out of this method, so we used the word void up here. However, we're actually returning the value of the name instance variable with this method. The instance variable name is a string, so we say public string, and we'll call it getName. Okay, we're not passing any information in, so our parameter list, which we're required to have, is going to be empty. Curly braces to define the body, and what we will do is we'll use the return statement. And this is a really simple method. It's just one line, and all we're doing is we're returning the whatever is inside the name instance variable. So let's come back up here, and we will do a second mutator method. And this one is going to be a little bit more complicated, not a whole lot, but just a little bit. And what this mutator method is going to do is set the value of the test instance variables. And instead of having three different methods, one for test 1, one for test 2, and one for test 3, we're going to code this so that it receives two pieces of information. The first piece of information will tell us what test we're actually setting, and then the second piece of information is going to be the actual score. So it will be something along the lines of the first is we'll say 1 to indicate test 1, and then like an 85 for the actual score of the test. Okay, methods within the class are public. Okay, this is a mutator method, which in this example the mutators are void. They're not returning any information. So we say void, and we're going to do set score. Now remember, we said that we needed two pieces of information to come in. The first is an integer, and we'll just name the integer I. And the second is the actual test score, and we'll call it score. Okay, so we have two pieces of information, I and score. I meaning it's going to have the value of 1, 2, or 3, and the score will actually be the actual score. So the first thing we want to do is we want to see what method we're going to be using, and what we'll do is we'll use an if structure. So if I has the value of 1, then test 1 will be assigned the value of the incoming score. Okay. Else if I has the value of 2, test 2 has the value of score. And the final else, if I is not 1 or 2, I must be 3, so test 3 receives score. Okay, there's no return statement, but because this is a void method, so that is what that is. And there's the end of set score. Now, as we're adding methods over here, you can see that their method header is going to be over here. You have your constructor method, set name, set score, and get name. So let's come down here, and we'll do a second accessor method to return the value of a specific score. Okay, again, methods are going to have the public visibility modifier. We're going to be returning the value of a specified test. All the tests are ints, so that's going to be, that second word is going to be int. We're going to call it get score. Now we're going to need to have a piece of information to know which score to get. The information is going to correspond much like we had this one, where it passes in I, and then it will pass out the corresponding score. So we're just going to call it int I. Okay. So if I is equal to 1, we are going to return test 1. Else if I has the value of 2, we're going to return test 2. If it's not 1 or 2, it must be 3, so we will return test 3. Okay, so basically our methods so far are to set the name and to set a score, get the name, and then to get a specific score. So let's create a method which will allow us to compute the average and then return that. That's going to be an accessor method. And we're going to use this method to compute and return the average of the 3 test scores. Okay. So we are going to be returning an integer, which is going to be the average of the 3 test scores, and we'll give it a name. And we don't need to actually use any information to come into this, so here we go. Okay. I'm going to show you 2 ways to do this. The first is to simply use the return statement. We're going to cast this as an integer. Test1 plus test2 plus test3, and then we're going to divide that by 3.0. This is going to round that to the nearest number. We're going to cast it as an integer and then just return it. That's one way to do this, and then I'm going to show you a second way. I'm going to comment out this line so you can still see it, but the compiler won't recognize it. Okay, what we're going to do now is we are going to declare a local variable within this method called avg, and then avg is going to have the value test1 plus test2 plus test3 divided by 3, and then we'll just return that. So basically this is the same thing. This line did not utilize a local variable to hold that, but this line is much simpler, maybe a little bit more intuitive than this, but really it's just a matter of style. What I would suggest is you find the method or the technique that works best in your mind and then just use it consistently. If there's a compelling reason to use a local variable, then by all means you need to use it. So I'm going to go ahead and take that first line out just so to clean up my code a little bit. Okay, and the last method that we're going to work with is a special accessor method which defines how this object would be printed. And this is a special method called toString. Okay, so define how the object is printed. And that's going to be public, and it's a string method called toString. No parameters. Okay. We're going to have a local variable, and we'll just call it str, and that's what we're going to return. We'll come back up, and then we go in and we define. So we're going to say that str is going to be name, a couple of tabs, and then the contents of the name local variable, and a new line character. And what we'll do is we'll include a final line which will give us the average of those three scores. Now we don't have a specific instance variable which holds that information, so what we'll do is we'll actually call the method that gives us that information. And that is that. That's how you would go about defining a class. Remember, a class is going to hold two very broad types of information. The first is the data that that object is going to have, and these are called instance variables, and their visibility modifier is private. Okay, which means that these variables are going to only be accessible by inside of this class. You also have a constructor method which sets the initial value. In this case we set the name to an empty string, and then each of the tests, test 1, test 2, and test 3 to 0. Mutator methods are going to be methods which actually change the values of the instance variables, and in this cases the mutators all had a return type of void, which means they did not actually pass any information out of these. The method is just used to change the value of the instance variables. The accessor methods did have return types, and in addition would have a return statement in the body of the method. So for getName, you return the name. For getScore, you have the structure set up to determine which test is returned. And then for this accessor method, getAverage, it actually computes the average of the 3 tests and then returns that average. And that is how you set that up. We will continue integrating this with another file in the next video. Thanks.